Oh, I haven't changed that. That should be 16 now. Okay. We are talking about socialism with Chinese characteristics. This is number 2. The number 1 was the end of the last term before I take. Okay, so we will continue with the socialism with Chinese characteristics. Xi Jinping, the current leader, said this: socialism with Chinese characteristics is socialism. Obviously, it is not any other sort of ism. Both history and our present reality tell us that only socialism can save China, and only socialism with Chinese characteristics can develop China. This is the conclusion of history, the choice of our people. So, but the idea of socialism with Chinese characteristics is not originated from Xi Jinping. It actually originated from Deng Xiaoping, but obviously he is taking it over also as his ideology to drive the China development. So let me play a little video to give you a background first. This is from South China Morning Post, which is an English newspaper in Hong Kong.
China today is the world's second largest economic power, trailing only the United States. It is also the most influential communist country among the handful that remain. China's leaders say its rise as a superpower was fueled by this socialism, what in the 1980s started calling socialism with Chinese characteristics. 40 years later, the phrase is still widely used by officials in state media, including current President Xi Jinping.
改革开放之初，我们党发出了走自己的路，建设中国特色社会主义的伟大号召。
What exactly does it mean? Following Mao Zedong's death in 1976, a struggle ensued over how China would move forward. Some wanted to double down on an economic model of top-down, Soviet-style state planning, while others were searching for a new development path after years of stagnation under Mao. The latter prevailed. In late 1978, Deng Xiaoping set China on a course for reform and opening up to the outside world. Competitive, market-based reforms first came to agriculture, and the success soon saw them take root across other parts of the economy. A private sector was allowed to gradually rise alongside the state-owned economy, and later came to rival it. The door was also opened wider for foreign businesses and investment, initially in special economic zones established in coastal provinces and cities like Guangdong and Shenzhen. China's integration into the global economy took its largest step when it joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, a move requiring extensive liberalization beforehand. Exports and trade soared, and China's economy experienced one of the most rapid expansions in history. Throughout this experimental embrace of markets and free enterprise, China still considered itself a socialist country, squaring the circle by describing its model as socialism with Chinese characteristics. One of the first uses of the phrase came in 1982, when Deng Xiaoping opened the party's 12th National Congress by saying, "In carrying out our modernization program, we must proceed from Chinese realities. We must integrate the universal truth of Marxism with the concrete realities of China, blaze a path of our own, and build a socialism with Chinese characteristics." While reaffirming the state's hold over the economy and the unchallenged dominance of the Communist Party, Deng also signaled that socialism could no longer be so rigid. The pragmatism of this shift to what was later referred to as a socialist market economy is best summed up by Deng's famous phrase, "It doesn't matter if the cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice." Months after his elevation to General Secretary of the Communist Party, Xi Jinping addressed doubts whether China is currently engaged in socialism or not, saying they were totally mistaken. We say socialism with Chinese characteristics is socialism. That is to say, no matter how we reform or how we open up, we will always adhere to the path of socialism with Chinese characteristics. But for China's leaders, where this path headed always depended on their read of conditions at home and abroad. In 2017, Xi declared that China had entered a new era, demanding a new kind of socialism.
18大以来，国内外形势变化和我国各项事业发展，都给我们提出了一个重大时代课题。这就是必须从理论和实践结合上，系统回答新时代坚持和发展什么样的中国特色社会主义，怎样坚持和发展中国特色社会主义。
This became known as Xi Jinping Thought on Socialism with Chinese Characteristics for a New Era, a guide to action inserted into the party constitution in 2017. Unwinding the substance of Xi Jinping thought is no easy task. It is best done by looking at his agenda, reasserting the state's dominance over the economy, rooting out corruption in the party and enhancing its role in Chinese society, as well as placing a renewed emphasis on areas such as technological self-reliance in the face of a confrontational United States. While this reverses some of the policies that fueled China's meteoric economic rise, it also reveals the flexibility at the heart of socialism with Chinese characteristics. As long as it achieves the goal of national rejuvenation and the party remains large and in charge.
Okay, so that is a summary from the South China Morning Post. Again, it is a newspaper in Hong Kong. So the South China Morning Post is very much a newspaper which reflects both Western values as well as the Hong Kong value or Chinese value. So it is at the crossroad there. So again, the most difficult thing is, of course, understanding what does it mean by socialism with Chinese characteristics. But the first thing is, it has given up communism. Okay? It talked about Marxism and the Leninism, but it have given up using the word communism. It now use the word socialism. So what is the difference between the socialism and communism? One of the interpretation is the control of production. In a communist ideology, the state control all aspects of production, including people's life. But in the socialism, the state relaxes some of this control, but it doesn't completely relax the control. That means it still maintains a very strong control of some industries and some production, but not all. So there's one number difference. Of course, that is also different from the capitalist economy, whereas almost every aspect of life is given to private enterprises. In the socialist world, it is not that case. So if you look at from a spectrum point of view, on one hand, we have top-down control of every aspect. And then on the other end of the spectrum, the government doesn't control anything. So along that continuum, socialism sits somewhere in between. The government controls some, and the private enterprise controls some. And so that is the socialism. And then again, that is a very wide spectrum. And among that very wide spectrum, they also add in the term Chinese. So what does it mean by adding into
grammar? I mean, okay lah, except the pronunciation.
I think that means Chinese values. So the socialism that is adopted today in China is in the middle of that spectrum between complete state control versus complete private enterprise, somewhere in between. But in that somewhere in between, they also respect the Chinese traditional values. So that's why it called the socialism with Chinese characteristics. That is at least what I try to understand it myself. So here is another quote, and that quote comes from Gazette Government.cn, the Chinese government's white paper. A historic transformation from a highly centralized planned economy to a dynamic socialist market economy has been achieved in China. So they have now give up on a highly centralized planned economy. This one they have given up, okay, but move into a socialist. That means somewhere in between, not exactly completely capitalist. A basic economic system in which public ownership takes the lead and different economic ownerships grow side by side has come into being. Now again here, the state is still taking the lead. Some of them is not complete. The market plays an increasingly important role in allocating resources, and the system of macroeconomic regulation is improving. Okay, the state played two roles here. One role is as part of this production and ownership. Another role is the control or the regulation of the market. A social security system, social security system cover both urban and rural residents is taking shape, and culture, education, science and technology, healthcare, sports, and other social programs are flourishing. So again, that is the Chinese characteristic part. In Chinese culture, we has always been very diverse, and therefore different aspects in terms of culture, education, and so forth are also flourishing. And that is a 2014 white paper. So looking back, we are now 2021. So this is something the Chinese government has already published. At least 7 years old by now. That idea has been working like that. And to me, from observing outside China, from Australia here, I find China government really execute this plan very well, as it has described in this white paper. So let's look at some other people's point of view. So the path of scientific, independent, open, peaceful, cooperative, and common development, a very long mouthful of the development described by the Chinese. First of all, it is scientific. Now, scientific means that when there is a government policy, the policy will be tested in a small scale before it will be implemented on the larger scale. So that is scientific. They are trying to base all the policy on the pragmatic effects of the policy. If the policy doesn't produce the effect they anticipate, they will modify until the policy is producing the kind of effects they are looking for. Then they will start implementing in the rest of the country. Now, that have driven some inequality. For example, we know that at the moment, China's eastern coast is much richer than the western provinces, because most of these policies were initially tried in the western on the east coast, and therefore east coast got much more policy flexibilities in order to meet their needs, and therefore develop much faster than the West. But now they're shifting the experimentation into more Western provinces. Hopefully that can reduce a bit of the inequality. The second part is independent. China's adopt a non-alliance foreign policy. China is not going to form any alliance with any country. They can be partners, can be friends, but they will not form any alliance with any other country. And the Chinese development also will depend on its own steps and policy, and it will not like to be interfered by other external power. So that is independent. Open means all the policies are transparent. Look at the quotes I gave in the last slide. That has been written out in the public. So if you want to understand China, you can, provided you can, first of all, read the Chinese first, because all this policy will predominantly be written in Chinese, and then eventually, sometime later on, they will translate into English. Usually, they will not publish the policy simultaneously in multiple language. The initial publication is usually just Chinese. And later on, when they find that there might be values for other people to understand, then it will publish in other language. But obviously, at the moment, the Chinese government is pretty open. All policies will be clearly stated, published, and let the people know. And then we'll let the people know where it will be tried first. And then later on, if it's successful, then it will be implemented throughout the country. Now, another one is about peaceful. Now, so far, China has not entered into war with any country, except a few minor border disputes, for example, with India and with Vietnam. The only two wars Chinese had, the current Chinese government, the Communist Party, China had entered, is the Korean War as well as the Vietnam War. These are the only two wars China has entered. So in the last 40 years, especially after opening in let's say 78, China has not entered into any war. So China's rise is a completely peaceful rise. It doesn't rise by sending soldiers around the world, colonizing people, robbing people, etc., etc. No, China's rise is a peaceful rise. Another part is cooperative. That means the Chinese rise is based on trade. When you have trade, then it is a cooperation, because nobody forces you to enter into a trade agreement with another parties unless both parties find it is advantageous to the parties. And therefore, when China's rise is an economic rise based on trade, then we can say it is a cooperative rise. And then common development. The common development is what Xi Jinping talked about as a human common destiny. Our whole human race, our human altogether have a common destiny. We have to do something together. We cannot solve a country's problem by itself. Two examples is, one is the pandemic, the COVID-19. The world haven't solved that problem yet. No. Although Chinese has already conquered COVID-19, but the world, we still have COVID spreading around. For example, Victoria here, we are already in lockdown. So, and yes, probably we will have another lockdown at least for a week, at least. I don't know how long. So that means we still have the problem of COVID. This is something we have to solve together. Another issue is, of course, the climate change. No country can solve the problem of climate change by itself. It has to be a global solution. So that is what they call common development. So again, I have taken out each of these terms and explain it in further details in different slides. I'm not going to read over that because I will be sending out the handouts so you can read it later on. So that is the scientific independent. So it will rely on itself to pursue development. Open, and Chinese learn from outside, but it will also tell everybody what we have learned and what we will do. China will try to integrate itself with the rest of the world. So that is the open part. Peaceful development, as I have explained, China's diplomacy is based on creating a peaceful and stable international environment for its development. And we believe that if we can develop in a peaceful environment, other countries can also do so. They can also benefit from a peaceful and stable international environment. Cooperative cooperation developments. China will try to minimize conflicts. And then we recognize that each country have their own merits and competitive advantage. And it is important for different country to maximize its competitive advantage in order to make our life better. Common development. Countries are increasingly interdependent. Only when common development, all countries is realized, the more people share the fruits of development, can world peace and stability be guaranteed. So again, Chinese very much emphasize on this stable and peaceful environment. So 3 ways to define the socialism with Chinese characteristics. The first way is socialism with Chinese characteristics is not Soviet Union's socialism nor capitalism. Second, socialism with Chinese characteristics is the integration of the fundamental tenets of scientific socialism with actual conditions of present-day China. And the third is a scientific socialism with Chinese characteristics. Let's say nothing interesting, but so let's look at the details. First, it insists on the domination of public ownership as the foundation of socialism. So there are some areas which the ownership will always remain to the state ownership. For instance, I will argue electricity, the distribution of electricity, water, the distribution of water, gas, the distribution of gas, communication and the distribution of communication. All this, for me, I think should be owned by the public.
I agree.
When it is owned by the public, first of all, as a government coordination, it can have the scale economy. We are talking about the government owning all in our country. So the first thing has this economy scale. The second is that we can level the playing ground between different areas. For example, in communication, here, you living in a rural area, our internet, our 3G, our 4G, or maybe eventually 5G coverage will depend on whether the private enterprise find it profitable or not. If they find it not profitable, they won't invest to that area, and therefore our rural area suffers. But in China, all the communication is public owned. So even for a village of 10 people, they will set up a antenna there in order to provide the 4G network, 5G network to that small community because it is public owned. So there are advantages of this. So I think China will control quite a large number of public ownership. In terms of another area for public ownership is the grains, the Chinese grains, the import and export of oil or energy, the import and export of different kinds of raw material like iron ore are all controlled by the state. And, also including the high-speed rails. Second, it adheres to the socialist economy and political system and the socialist ideology, where building a socialist market economy in which the market is given full play in allocating resources. So you recognize the efficiency of market-driven allocation of resources. So even if the enterprise is a state-owned enterprise, it still want the state-owned enterprises to compete against each other. And to give you an example is the development of high-speed rail. When the Chinese determined to develop high-speed rail, they split the high-speed rail manufacturing part, which is a state-owned company, into two state-owned companies. One is called the North Car, the other is called South Car. Split it into two companies and let that two companies, although both of them are state-owned, to compete against each other in bidding for production of the trains. By doing that, they are driving the efficiency and driving the competition, the innovation speed up. So again, Chinese fully realize the efficiency of market economy to drive efficiency. On the other hand, they want to have control of the main production. So the solution now here is the state can split their state-owned enterprise into competing companies when necessary. For example, when it is import and export oriented, today, the Chinese manufacturing a high-speed rail had to compete with the other high-speed rail companies in the world. They joined the company together into one again. So today, China is competing with private enterprise as a single unit rather than multiple units. So the state have this flexibility in doing that. Third, it insists on the dominating role of distribution according to work. So that is again a shift from the capitalist ideology. In capitalist ideology, the value generation, the profit, is almost solely rewarded to the capital. So the capital owns a company and the company make a profit. The profit goes to the owner of the company. It doesn't go to the workers. Of course, we say, okay, the company have to employ workers in order to make the products. But when the supply of labor is in a low demand, then the companies is able to squeeze the wages down. Of course, if the company has to employ the workers from the country and the supply is limited, then the wages will go up. But today in the globalized world, the factories can be located anywhere in the world. Therefore, companies can seek lowest production value by relocating their factories to an area where the production cost is the lowest. That may include the price paid for the environment. It may include the living standard of the location of the factory. And therefore, the original location, for example, we have a company in Australia, let's say Telstra. Okay, Telstra is an Australian company. It should always employ Australia as its employee foremost, right? But when it discovered that they can locate their call centers in, let's say, Bangladesh, because the living standard there is lower, and the English of the people in Bangladesh is able to serve Australia, then they will move the call centers to Bangladesh, reducing the cost to Telstra. But on the other hand, our workers here in Australia lost jobs. So the loss of jobs is not due to competition from other areas. It's due to the profit-driven nature of capitalist companies. The companies just seek maximum profit. So it is a natural tendency for the companies to move the costly So China say, no, we don't want to do that. We want the distribution of profit based on work, not based on who provided the capital. So it is, China is not a capitalist society in that sense, because the government deliberately do not want to reward large capital. How to do that? I will try to explain that later on in future meetings. And it always acknowledge the leading role of working class. Again, working class is important. Now, last time we talked about the Communist Party has over 90 million members, and together with their youth league and other 90 million members, the Chinese Communist Party represent approximately 10 to 12% of the Chinese population. And these people are the working class. Therefore, it has to reflect its policy to benefit the working class. So there is another very major difference from the politics in, for example, Australia here. Our politicians doesn't have to worry about working class as long as they can be elected. So how they can sell it to our working class and then get our votes, and then once they are voted in, they no longer have to serve the working class for at least the duration of the term. And then just before election, they will just come out and say, oh, I work for the working class, and then get our votes. Fifth, the leading role of the party and the people's role as the master of the country. Now, power is highly concentrated in the Chinese political party. That's true. But remember, the party has almost 10% of the population of Chinese. So it is a very good representation of the Chinese people. And these members are fighting among itself in a very competitive environment to get promoted into the higher ranks. It is a merit-based system. And this competition is not based on 1 month of lobbying or 1 week of having a good speech. It is based on 20, 30 years of work from the lowest rank working through to the top of the political power. Through that journey, then the best people are being selected. And again, the party makes the leading role because it represents at least 11 to 12% of the first of the people's in China. And at the same time, the highest power rests in the 3,000 people National Congress, and therefore people is the master of the country. So this is again a very different political system compared to our political system here in Western world. The socialism with Chinese characteristics recognize Marxism's guiding role in the ideological sphere, while allowing differences and diversity is in ideology and culture. It also requires the Chinese to fend off incorrect and these candid ideas and develop a national, scientific, and popular socialist culture that is geared to the needs of modernization of the world and of the future. That since the formation of the Chinese Social Communist Party, the whole idea is the modernization of China. Because I think back to the history, we know that in the last 200 and 300 years, China is very much a backward. So it has been the dream of all the leading thinkers in China to modernize. And therefore, any party which can lead China to a rejuvenation with a modernization will get the support of the Chinese people. And therefore, the CCP understand it very well. And they put in a lot of emphasis in terms of a modernization. The modernization path have been successful, has failure as well as success. The first leader, Mao Zedong, the chairman Mao, proposed the second combination of the Marxism and the Chinese heuristic, but unfortunately he failed. He failed to achieve his purpose because much of his understanding of Marxism was outdated. It based on a conflict between classes. That's where Mao failed because he created too much conflict, and therefore revolution after revolution after revolution inside China, which impede the development of China. Deng Xiaoping point out that when Mao's path doesn't work, we need to take another path. Instead of emphasis on the class struggle, now they are reworking on it and use the Marxist thinking in terms of guiding the socialism, how to allocate resources. So that's where you come up with a lot of the main market allocation is a state-owned enterprise. So Deng Xiaoping combined the basic principle of scientific socialism with modern China's reality. He proposed to investigate the mind and re-examine socialism. After that, he put forward the following views. China is now in the primary stage of socialism and will remain in this stage for a long time. Socialist countries can have market economies. The essence of socialism is the liberation and the development of productive forces, eliminating the exploitation and the polarization, and the ultimate achievement of prosperity for all. This new perspective constitute the foundation of socialism with Chinese characteristics. So again, one of the failure of communism is the motivation to work, where everybody is equal. You don't have a motivation to exert yourself harder than the person next to you because you will be rewarded the same. But if you are in a market-driven environment, when the competition encourages innovation as well as hard work, then motivation go up. But at the same time, we don't want to allow a small handful of people monopolize the profit and monopolize the power. So that is, again, a contradiction where it had to find a way to solve. With that foundation laid, the construction of socialism with Chinese characteristics began. At the turn of this century, changing situation in China and the rest of the world requires CCP to make changes. The CCP members represented by Zhang Jiwen added new contents to the theory of socialism with Chinese characteristics by putting forward the important thought of the three represents. In the 21st century, the CCP Central Committee, led by the Wu Jintao, further enriched the theory of socialism with Chinese characteristics by putting forward the scientific outlook on development. Now, China today isn't driven by ideology. It's driven by pragmatism. It's driven by scientific approach. So a very quick one down. I think I will return to the Chinese characteristics a bit more later on. But I think we have talked about the Chinese system, and we have talked about the all kinds of. So, any question? Anyone? No?
Well, yes, this is it's a very interesting and a very good theory, I think. But how are they keeping control all the different forces that come into play with this?
By law and order, I suppose. Take example of now. First of all, the biggest fear I think for CCP is the rebellion of Chinese people. We're talking about 1.4 billion people. If this 1.4 billion people is not satisfied with CCP, when there's a rebellion, it is very difficult to control 1.4 billion. No matter what you say about how much military power, how much force you want to apply to the common people, when common people do not agree as a whole to the government, the rebellion is very powerful. I think that is one of the major concerns of CCP. And therefore, CCP has to keep on making sure that the Chinese people are happy for them to rule over them. How can you make people happy? So that is a major question. One question is, of course, when your life is better than yesterday, you're happy. So as long as Chinese people are happy, then your rule becomes concrete, becomes tight. So one way to do that is continuously try to find ways for improving the lives of Chinese people. In the past 40 years has been easy, but it will be becoming more and more difficult as China develops more and more. Because obviously, from a very low level, from very poor starting point, you can quickly build up your wealth. So people are saying, wow, I'm improving. You look at my city here, you look at my house, you look at the kind of clothes I have, you look at the kind of food I have. I'm improving, I'm happy. But at one point,
Yes.
then we will have to see what China will do to maintain its modernization path. So some people argue China entered into a very dangerous phase at the moment because Chinese has achieved a moderate prosperous state. At least China haven't got any extreme poverty. But how to maintain growth? China has been maintaining a 10% growth over 40 years. But can they do that? I don't think so. It's very difficult now. So now the growth here is have to match with two things. One is match with the population growth. The other is to match with inflation. So let's say we have a population growth of say 1%, okay? An inflation growth of say 2%, okay? Very low inflation, 2% per year, okay? So we're talking about 3% growth here. If you want the people to feel better, your economic growth has to be more than 3%. You have growth below 3%, you have economy shrinking, shared by among people. But we know that for our developed world, Australia, America, it's normally 3%. It's around 3%. So can China maintain an economic growth larger than their natural growth? the population growth. Chinese natural birth rate is very low at the moment, 1.some%. So it's good in that sense, but it's not good in the long run because you will be running out of workers to drive your economy. The population getting old. So that is one important thing to consider long term. But meanwhile, it's good because, well, we don't have so much growth in terms of population. The second is, of course, the inflation. With the Western countries, including us, the government is printing so much money. That means the money pool is getting bigger. We have more money floating around. But the resources, there's not much development in the resource. For example, the real economic growth in the world has almost stopped 2020. When your money pool has increased, whereas the resources haven't, that means each resources will have an inflation. The American inflation at the moment is about 5%. So if China allow the inflation to be imported into China, because when the resources price rise, of course, recently the resources dropped a little bit, but in the beginning of this year, all the resources have risen. Iron ore, China is a production country. It had to buy in all these resources. And therefore, when your input price rises because of the falling values of money, you have an inflation. And that makes Chinese development even worse because you have a large inflation value coming in. Let's say the inflation this year, they're out of control. It may inflate by, say, 5%. Then you need at least 6% growth just to make even. People won't feel the benefit. So one way to do that is, of course, by raising the value of renminbi. The exchange value of renminbi increase. That means you spend less renminbi to buy the resources. Just for America, from Trump and Biden, both of them have already printed about 4 billion, no, not billion, trillion, $4 to $5 trillion. Government bonds increased by at least 4 billion. That means it is an inflation of about 20%. Of course, the 20% won't be reflected directly, but eventually it will be reflected in the resources available in the earth. Because at the moment, everybody is getting money from the government. And that's why 2021, actually 2020, second half of the year to today, the Chinese import-exports expanded by about 20%. That 20% represent the money printed by the rest of the world. You have normal is normal, okay? But when they expand by 20%, that 20%, where does it come from? Where the money come from? It comes from the printing. So the Chinese problem is, again, economic.
Do they regulate wages? I mean, is there a big difference in wages in China between the richest and the poorest?
Yeah, the richest and the poor is still a large wage gap, like in any other country. Okay, but they are taking steps to minimize the difference. They are now limiting the maximum number of they are trying to put a ceiling on the highest paid employee. So by putting up a ceiling and then pushing up the lower, so they try to, but I haven't seen the exact policy yet, but I know that they are talking about this policy at the moment, because one of one of my friend is very much involved in their economic planning. So from what he talking, he's at the moment very interested in thinking about the idea of applying a ceiling for wages. Any other questions? Is there any economist here? No? So I can say anything. Okay. In that case, we may end a little earlier, and then I think next week we will still have our meetings on Zoom. So use the same Zoom invitation you can get in. Okay.
Good. Thank you, Albert. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, everybody.
Good. Take
Bye.
care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.